All right. Good morning. Hello. Welcome to Connecticut's National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure NEVI program pre-solicitation public information meeting. This is a live event that we are running at 2 different times today. And we are recording this webinar. So if you aren't able to tune in for the whole event, or if you think that a colleague would benefit from seeing this presentation, you'll be able to find this link to the recording on our NEVI website and also on Connecticut DOT's public meeting archive website. We do want to emphasize that this meeting is to provide stakeholders advance notice that there is a solicitation opening soon and that there's going to be future webinars and events scheduled to talk about the solicitation in more detail in the coming weeks and months. The intention of today's meeting is to talk about the logistics of the program and to give folks more advanced notice to get prepared for the opening of Connecticut's grant solicitation. So if you have questions during the webinar, we ask that you put them in the Zoom question and answer box, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. If you find you don't have time to ask your question, or if you think of a question later, you can reach out to us via email. Our email is right there on the screen and also in the chat, or leave a voicemail on the project manager's phone. As I mentioned, we'll be having additional grant solicitation webinars, so there'll be lots more information coming at you in the coming weeks. We'll also be putting all the NEVI updates on our Connecticut NEVI webpage, which the link is included on this page. If you are new to Zoom, or if you're trying to access the captions and subtitles, these instructions should help you. To turn on this feature, select the CC button at the bottom right of your screen. This turns on the captioning. Then choose a language by selecting the settings wheel next to the CC button, and you can select the desired language. These are directions on where to find the Zoom question and answer box. Like I mentioned earlier, we would appreciate that any questions you have during the presentation go into the Q&A field, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. For those of you who are joining via phone, you can dial *9 during the question and answer section of the webinar, and that will raise and lower your hand, and you let us know you have a question for the team. Here is Connecticut DOT's Title VI notice. The Connecticut Department of Transportation operates its programs and services without regard to race, color, and national origin in accordance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Any person who believes she or he has been aggrieved by any lawful discriminatory practices under Title VI may file a complaint with the Connecticut DOT. There are directions on the slide outlining the procedure to file a Title VI complaint. This slide also covers Title VI, but is in Spanish. All right, here's our agenda for the day. I'll introduce you to the speakers you'll be hearing from today. There will be a brief overview of the NEVI program. We will give an overview of the solicitation, including the purpose, the available funding, and eligibility and requirements. Then the application process will be discussed. At their end, there will be time for you to ask questions and answers. And finally, we'll share with you what's next and how you can stay informed. As I mentioned earlier, the intention of today's meeting is to talk about the logistics of the program and to provide folks advance notice to get prepared for the opening of Connecticut's grant solicitation. There's going to be a lot of details about the solicitation that won't be covered today, but will be coming out in the next couple weeks and months. So here's the team you'll be hearing from today. Myself, Jen Riley, I serve as a Transportation Planner 2 at the Connecticut DOT, and I serve as Connecticut's NEVI Program Manager. Jackie Murdoch, she's a Planning Discipline Leader at CDM Smith. She's on our consultant team, and so is Diane Moss. She's the Chief Resilience and Sustainability Officer at Fuss & O'Neill Incorporated. We appreciate their help. So before we get too far, if desired, you may use the chat function to list your contact information for those who want the opportunity to network with others. The chat is part of the recorded webinar and will be posted as part of the presentation online. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what the NEVI program entails. NEVI is part of the $5 billion that was allocated for EV charging in the Federal Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act of 2021, also called the IIJA or IJA. The overarching goal of the NEVI program is to support the expansion of a nationwide electric vehicle charging network. The NEVI minimum standards, which you see referenced on this slide, help ensure that each state is working with the same minimum requirements of what a fully built out fast charging network will look like across the country. I would recommend anyone who is thinking about applying for federal funding to install EV charging, either in Connecticut or other states, to please read and understand these minimum standards, because all NEVI projects will have to abide by these minimum standards. So the IIJ formula funding gives approximately $52 million to Connecticut over a 5-year time frame. And Connecticut DOT will be administering the funds for the formula funding. The federal regulations require states to fully build out their federal highway designated alternative fuel corridors before funding EV charging in other locations of the state. That being a federal requirement, the first phase of Connecticut's NEVI funding supports expanding EV charging stations on private sites along Connecticut's alternative fuel corridors, and those consist of about 350 miles of the state's interstate system. Think I-84, I-91, I-95, and Route 7. But before any of the federal funds could be allocated to the state to build out EV infrastructure, the NEVI program requires each state to submit a deployment plan to the Federal Highway Administration by August 1st. Connecticut's NEVI plan encompassed fiscal year 22 and 23. Federal Highway approved that plan in September of 2022. Connecticut DOT submitted fiscal year 24 plan to Federal Highway in August of this year. In short, the fiscal 24 plan serves as an amendment or amendum to Connecticut's fiscal year 22 and 23 plan, and incorporates actions that have occurred since 2022, as well as programmatic changes the state anticipates incorporating into DOT's 2023 grant solicitation. You can find a copy of the plan on our NEVI website, and we have included a link here. And for phase 1, which is what this program is about, Connecticut DOT anticipates about $15 million will be available to complete the build out of the DC fast charging network along Connecticut's alternative fuel corridors. So eligible entities, as indicated in the NEVI final rulemaking, include but are not limited to businesses, examples being corporations, partnerships, sole proprietorships, limited liability companies, government-owned entities such as municipalities, state agencies, universities, community colleges, and also tribal governments are eligible to apply. I want to include a point here that if any of these entities are thinking of responding to Connecticut's grant solicitation, and aren't the actual site owners where the EV charger will reside, then now is the time to ensure you start finalizing those commitments with your partners. So this map may look really familiar to some of you. This shows the 12 priority zones that Connecticut DOT has identified for phase 1 of the NEVI program. We did find when we reevaluated our DC fast charger gas gap analysis to account for any new stations built since 2022, when the first NEVI plan was filed, that some stations that had previously shown to be NEVI compliant were now not showing as NEVI compliant by the Department of Energy. To account for those changes, we added a new priority location in Meriden off of I-91. You can see that on the slide, and you can also see each location broken out by corridor segment and by location in the chart to the left. In order for a corridor to be fully built out, a site needs to meet the minimum NEVI standards of having at least 4 150 kW ports with a minimum of at least 600 kW per site of available power for chargers, and being located 1 drivable mile from the end of an exit ramp off an alternative fuel corridor. Connecticut DOT is considering making exceptions for unique proposals near these identified zones, but within a drivable mile of an interstate ramp. Okay, I referenced the NEVI plan earlier and how it is required for states to show both the federal government and our stakeholders what the state hopes to achieve through our NEVI program and our planning efforts and our grant solicitation. Here are some of our overarching goals of the program. We want to accelerate EV adoption and deployment so that fast charging is convenient and reliable. We want to provide equitable access to the benefits of electrification. We want to boost range confidence so that everyone can recharge an EV when and where they need it to. We also are working to engage stakeholders. We have avenues for you to reach out via email, phone, so please don't hesitate to do so. We also want to make sure the network is accessible and easy to locate. Another goal is to maximize our investments, something to keep in mind when you're thinking of your project proposals. So let's get into some of the requirements for the grant solicitation. Respondents will be required to complete a 2-step competitive solicitation process, which Jackie will go over in a moment. It will be required that all the requirements that are outlined in the final NEVI rule 23 CFR 680 will be upheld, and that all applicants must accept the grant terms and conditions without negotiation. As for funding, the Connecticut NEVI program will be administered as a federal aid highway program, which caps federal participation at 80% of total eligible project costs. The respondent must demonstrate a financial plan to meet the remaining 20% matching fund requirement. I think from here, Jackie's going to take it.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Hello, everyone. As Jen mentioned, my name is Jackie Murdoch. I'm serving as one of the planning leads here on the consultant team supporting Connecticut DOT on delivering the NEVI program. Today, I'll be walking you through at a high level the LOI process and logistics. The application process, as we mentioned earlier, is structured in 2 stages. The initial letter of intent, followed by a request for proposals. Both steps are required, and this webinar is centered around the LOI stage, which is about to open here shortly. Next slide, Emily. Thank you. So what is an LOI and why is it required? The LOI here is really meant to serve as a self-assessment for potential applicants, or in this case, respondents to the LOI, to ensure compliance with the federal regulations that we were talking about earlier and Connecticut's NEVI plan. We're also referring to the NEVI plan sometimes as the CT Charging Ahead plan. This approach allows applicants to gauge their project readiness at a high level and also provide Connecticut DOT the opportunity to review respondents' project readiness and offer feedback to encourage a complete and competitive RFP in the next stage. So the letter of intent, some of the logistics. So our submissions are due, or the LOI will be open between September 28th and November 9th. You can submit those LOIs anytime between those 2 dates. The LOIs will be accepted on a Microsoft Form platform with hyperlinks and other technical resources to be provided on the Connecticut NEVI website. If you have any issues accessing the form, please use the email you see here on this slide, ct-dotevplanning@ct.gov. Now let's talk about the types of information that we're going to be requesting in the LOI. These topics include general information about the respondent, the eligibility of both the respondent and potential site location, per those federal regulations that we've been mentioning, and Connecticut's NEVI plan. They also include information regarding the readiness of the site, proposed project funding for the site, technical specifications of the EVSE equipment, and information on the future operations and maintenance of the site. Again, all with the understanding of being in compliance with the federal rulemaking. So what can you do to get ready for the LOI? Connecticut DOT is providing technical resources to help respondents complete the LOI. They'll be reviewing each of these items in more detail on the following slides, but just as a quick overview, again, encouraging everyone to review those federal regs, to review the Connecticut NEVI information, including, again, the site requirements, equipment requirements, operations and maintenance requirements. Confirm your location, which Diane will be going through here in a moment on how to do that. Confirm your eligibility and identify your funding source for the non-federal match. Again, a little bit of those early actions for the LOI. So first, respondents will need to ensure that they understand and meet the federal requirements in this and understand the state NEVI plan. These requirements cover site specifications, equipment standards, and operations and maintenance guidelines, among other components that we've been mentioning here a few times today. This slide provides links to those key resources, and I believe we put them in the chat as well to assist you, including, again, the final federal rule on the NEVI program, frequently asked questions that are provided by the Federal Highway Administration, as well as CT's NEVI, Connecticut DOT's NEVI plan, which defines the state's priority locations for NEVI implementation for phase 1, which Diane is going to be going over how to check for those locations here in a moment. Diane, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jackie. As mentioned earlier, I'm Diane Moss from Fuss & O'Neill, part of the consultant team assisting the department. So another important step is to confirm your location. So you should confirm your proposed location relative to the NEVI priority zones that were mentioned earlier. You can use the QR code on the slide or the link on the Connecticut DOT NEVI website. I believe the link is also being put in the chat. And this will bring you to a mapping tool that is intended to help you identify your project location. To use the tool, you enter a street address or a latitude and longitude coordinates, and the tool will navigate to that location on the map. You can also use the draw tool in the upper right-hand corner of that screen that you'll see to draw the approximate boundaries of your proposed project site. The map shows the locations of the 12 NEVI priority zones, and you can determine the location of your proposed project site relative to those zones. The print tool allows you to create a map of your screen view in a variety of file formats, including PDF and JPEG. The LOI instructions will ask that you include a copy of that map showing your location relative to the priority zones. Next slide. You should also confirm your eligibility relative to the NEVI final rulemaking. The LOI application will ask you to identify which of these 3 general categories the respondent fits into. As Jennifer mentioned earlier, eligible entities as indicated in the NEVI final rulemaking include, but are not limited to, businesses, examples being corporations, partnerships, sole proprietorships, limited liability partnerships, government-owned entities such as municipalities, state agencies, universities, and community colleges, and tribal governments are also eligible to apply. Next slide, please. Finally, you should make sure you've identified a funding source for the required non-federal match for the project. As mentioned earlier, the NEVI program will cover up to 80% of eligible project costs. The LOI will also ask you to confirm that you have a plan to meet the required match of at least 20% of non-federal funds. The LOI application will ask you to provide the total project budget, the requested NEVI funding amount, up to 80% of the total, and a brief description of your plan to commit non-federal funding to cover at least 20% of the capital project costs. Next slide.
All right, thank you, Diane. The LOI application will be available on September 28th and will be due to Connecticut DOT on or before November 9th. The LOI will allow Connecticut DOT an opportunity to provide feedback to respondents ahead of the request for proposal or the RFP solicitation, which is expected to be released in the winter of 2024. If you fill out an LOI, you can expect to be contacted by email by the Connecticut DOT. And that concludes our presentation for today. We look forward to hearing your questions, and I believe our moderator has been keeping track of questions that have been coming in. So let's see what we have here.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Quite a few questions. So yeah, anybody on the webinar, please keep sending them in and we'll keep track of them. So first question, are utilities eligible? Second part of the question, is this available through downloadable GIS files? And are utility contracts available for the eligible locations?
So are utilities eligible for this opportunity? That is a great question. I would have to double check. I believe that they are. As long as they're within the 1 mile of alternative fuel corridor, they own the land. I believe they are.
Okay. Follow up to that, regarding the letter of intent, will Connecticut be providing a fillable form, or will respondents be required to submit their own narrative to answer questions?
Yeah. Thanks for your question. We will be providing a fillable form. We will have it linked on our website, so you'll be able to access it, and all that information will be going out via email and social media and many other ways on September 28th. So it will be available for everyone to go in and start getting your application together. And you can, according to the system that we've been practicing with, you'll be able to go in and modify your application in that fillable form if you need to before you submit it.
Okay, great. So next question, for 150 kilowatt and 600 kilowatt site total unique exceptions, would that also include variants of ports and power per port? Can you expand on what exceptions would be considered?
Yeah, so we are limited by the federal minimum standards. So every site location must have 4 150 kW stations that can charge a vehicle simultaneously and have a CCS connector. anything additional from those 4 stations, if you wanted to include other connectors, other chargers in addition to that, would be part of that unique proposal. So the minimum standards have to be upheld for this program. But there will be exceptions, like there'll be scoring criteria within our LOI and further on in our, well, in the RFP, that will explain like how proposals will be evaluated later on, but minimum federal standards.
Okay, great. Next question. So this is specific to a municipality. Beacon Falls recently was awarded an EV grant to replace its existing level 1 station with a level 2. Will the town be allowed to participate in the upcoming solicitation should it want to expand its stations? So the EV station is off of Route 8.
Yeah, thank you for your inquiry. For phase 1, Beacon Falls would not be able to participate in this round of funding because the funding is specifically dedicated to alternative fuel corridors, and Route 8 currently is not an alternative fuel corridor. That being said, there may be opportunities later in the program to fund level 2 chargers or additional fast chargers. But like I indicated earlier in the presentation, we have to build out the fast corridors before we can move on. But we're excited that you're interested in building more chargers. That's great.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Can applicants take advantage of the program incentives through utilities to offset the 20% out-of-pocket commitment?
So currently how it stands with the utility Make Ready program, that is not an option. So that if you're using the Connecticut EDC program, that isn't allowed under their program to use that in addition to our NEVI funds.
Okay. Based on the timeline shared, when is the earliest an approved project would be green lighted with NEVI funds?
I don't have a exact timeline on my head. I think we're probably thinking spring of 2024.
Okay. Next question, can we clarify if applicants should refer to the Justice 40 map to determine if locations are in a DAC?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I kind of glossed over the GIS question earlier, so this will give me the opportunity. So yeah, the Justice 40 does definitely a big part of this program. So there are maps available that we recommend you reference and look to see if your site location is in one of those locations. And we have this new tool that Diane was mentioning that you'll be able to use to determine your locations relative to the priority zones. And so I would recommend using that. But certainly the Justice 40 areas are something that we're going to be looking very closely at. So thank you for that question.
Great. Will we be requiring NACS connectors?
That's still up in the air. I think we're going to be evaluating both the NACS connectors going through their safety protocols. But I think we'll be looking at unique proposals where maybe NOx is included. But that is not yet to be determined in Connecticut. But thank you for that question.
Right. couple more. So yeah, if anyone has any questions remaining, please send them in. But these are really great questions, so thank you. Next question, do applicants have to own the land or can they lease? If they lease, can they provide a site host letter of intent to confirm that the site will be available for 5 years of the contract period?
Yeah, we're definitely going to want to see some agreement between the site host and the person who's applying for the funding. We are running through those details right now, and that will be explained in detail. With the LOI, you'll be able to attach documents to show that you have that partnership set up. And in the RFP, there'll be additional information you'll need to provide. So yeah, that is great that you're on that road to make sure you have all the right materials. So we will be requiring that information.
Next question, what are the requirements for Buy America, Build America for all parts of the project, not just the EV chargers? For instance, are all of the electrical equipment and construction materials required to meet the requirements of FHWA, even though these are NEVI funds?
Yeah, so the Build America, Buy America, it's very much spelled out within the federal regulations. There's actually a fact sheet about it. We can get you that. I'm not going to get into all of the different components because it is a little bit, I'm not as well versed on it as I should be, but there is a document that we can reference that you can reference to make sure that all the equipment is meeting the Build America and Buy America standards. Thank you for that question.
Will there be any scoring preference for chargers with power capacity greater than 150 kilowatts? We discourage this and recommend a broader future-proofing scoring criteria.
So are they asking, I'm sorry, if they're asking for greater than, yeah, so if for projects that are more than 150 kW, we definitely welcome those proposals. Right now, this LOI is the bare bones, like, of what you're thinking. And there'll be more opportunity to expand on your idea within the RFP. So this is still being determined how the scoring criteria will play out, but thank you for your comment.
Next question, regarding the no negotiation for the terms and conditions, will the full terms and conditions be released as a part of the LOI materials?
I believe that more of that contracting language will probably be included in the RFP. So you might have to wait a bit for that.
Okay. Will you give preference to Energy Star certified DCFC consistent with Connecticut's appliance efficiency standards and climate goals?
Thank you for that question. That is something we are looking at in our criteria. It hasn't been set in stone, but it's certainly something that we're interested in. So we will be taking that under advisement. Thank you.
Next question, if our city was awarded funds through DEEP's EV infrastructure GARPT program, are we eligible for this program?
I'm not familiar with what the GARPT program is. I think we'll have to look into that. I think it will depend on whether or not that particular program was a federally funded program, because we can't match federal funds to federal funds. But you can email me and reach out and we can get that looked at. Thank you for that question.
Next question. Is there any preference to Connecticut companies?
So many criteria questions. I'm gonna have to say we haven't figured out all the scoring criteria. So I don't have an exact question or an exact answer to this question. But I think that's something that we may consider. Thank you for that.
Is there an expected timeline for applicants to install stations once awarded?
Oh, yes, I get asked this question a lot. I think this is still to be determined. So I don't want to say anything, but that will be included in the RFP language once that's written, and expect that in the winter of 2024. Thanks for that.
Okay. Will you be requiring a specific timeline for construction to be completed post grant award?
I think this is the same as the question that I just answered. Still being determined as to how long after the grant is awarded when it has to be operational. So I don't have a concrete answer for you, but I appreciate you asking.
Is there flexibility to submit for exits near the designated study areas, for example, 1 or 2 exits away?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That is something we are considering, but there would have to be justification attached to that as to why you would go in 1 or 2 exits away and not the priority zone. Well, we may be considering those, so thanks for that.
What is the approximate timeline for the release of the RFP after the LOI period?
So the release of the RFP, our ideas is to get responses to folks who filled out the LOI in January. And then from there, we would have it out within a month or so from that. It's all going to depend on a lot of our resource constraints and that sort, but we're hoping winter of 2024. The first quarter, not the last quarter.
Thank you. Can an applicant apply for multiple sites?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So we're asking that applicants have 1 application per site, and that will be all explained within the LOI directions. But you could very well apply for multiple sites, but they would be different applications.
Great. Is the Plainfield I-395 service plaza still an eligible priority zone?
So I think they're just outside the priority zone on the site tool. But that is something that possibly could be one of those exceptions that I was talking about earlier, if there was a good justification. Thank you for that inquiry.
Few more questions. Will municipalities be able to recoup EV charging costs, or is there a waiting period before being able to charge its users?
So this is a little bit complicated. So if you were awarded a NEVI grant, could you recoup your costs of charging someone to use it, or is it just a general question? The NEVI program does allow, if you use federal funding to put a charger, that you could charge a user to use this charger a reasonable amount. If that helps answer your question.
So 2 more questions. If anyone has any lingering questions, get those in the next minute or so. And then obviously we have our contact information to follow up with us afterwards if a question pops into your mind. after
Okay.
this presentation. So next question, will either the applicant or the installation contractors have to register with the DOT to participate?
Tina, thanks for that question. As long as you fill out an LOI, right now that would be the only requirement that you would need to participate.
Great. And then last question that I can see here, will the LOI need to account for all sites that the applicant will be applying for? Or will there be an opportunity to add additional sites between the LOI and RFP submission?
I think how we have it structured now is that if you want to apply for NEVI grant funding, you need to fill out an LOI before November 9th, for any location. I don't foresee that changing, but that would be our recommendation. And again, there would be one site per application, but they have to be in by November 9th.
Great. One more question, but also just a comment. Beacon Falls thanks us for presenting this EV information. Just wanted to share
Beacon
that.
Falls.
Thank you. So last question here. We have a scenario with quantity 2 150 kilowatt dual port station allowing up to 4 cars to charge simultaneously. Each station would charge 150 kilowatts when with 1 car charging. However, if 2 cars are charging, the per port value would fall to 75 kilowatts. If we provide 2 dual port stations at 150 kilowatts with 4 ports, would that meet the 4 port requirement?
Nope, not currently with the minimum NEVI standards. You have to do when two cars are plugged in at the same time, you have to maintain the 150 kW across both chargers the ports. So you could upgrade those to meet the 4 port requirement. But that's where the minimum standards hold right now. But thank you for that question.
Okay, so not seeing any additional questions come in. So if they come in the next minute or so, I'll let you know. But yeah, any closing thoughts, Jen or the
Yeah,
team?
I'm like, yep, thank you. Okay, so to wrap it up, keep an eye out for September 28th for the drop of the LOI submission. We will be contacting stakeholders via email, social media, and we'll also have those materials posted on our website. Remember that the LOI responses are due by DOT by 5 o'clock on November 9th. We have a specific LOI webinar coming up. It's planned for October 3rd at 1 o'clock. There's registration information here. We'll also be providing open office hours on October 11th and October 23rd to answer questions folks have about the LOI or the NEVI program in general. Please register for those if you're thinking of applying, and we can get rolling with this. In addition, don't hesitate to reach out anytime by email if you haven't already. And I recommend that you sign up for email updates on our website so you get all the NEVI distribution emails that we send out. So with that, I want to thank everyone for coming today and all the presenters. And I really appreciate everyone tuning in today.
So Jen, last 2 questions. Hopefully,
Okay,
these will be.
I'm ready.
Yeah, no, hopefully they'll be quick ones. So, will there be any DBE preference?
So the DBE evaluation criteria are still under development in the RFP, but we appreciate your inquiry and something that we're looking at. Thank you.
And then last question, does Connecticut have an interested partnership list?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We're using the chat function today to have people list who they are, what they're involved in. So we're using that as the networking tool. So we don't have an actual list that we're publishing. We're just using that chat. And I also want to mention that Federal Highway has a lot of facts about DBE that will probably be incorporated into an RRFP. So if you haven't seen that already, I would recommend you checking that out. Thank you everyone for all your questions. Is there any more?
No, but if anyone has any lingering questions or comments, please use the email address for sending those in.
All right. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, and look forward to working with you all in the future. Thank you. Bye.